What if the history we know is only a faint copy of an older, far greater story, one that time has almost completely erased? What if there once existed another civilization? It's not 5 or 10,000 years ago, but tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago, a world that rose and vanished long before we were given names. And what if it still lingers around us? Not in books, but hidden in legends, in weathered stones, in carvings on cave walls, in spiraling patterns on relics, and in the very soil beneath our feet, where time is pressed together like the memory of the planet itself. It's not a comfortable question because it forces us to look inward. What if we are not the beginning, but only a repetition, a familiar echo in the endless cycle of life? From childhood, we've been taught that history moves in a straight line, from wilderness to civilization, from fire to electricity, from caves to cities, from pebbles to the internet. But what if all those milestones are just ripples on the surface of a vast ocean of memory? An ocean so deep that no one has ever touched its floor? Perhaps Earth itself has witnessed not one but many lights that rose and then faded silently into the dark. Think about where you stand right now. How many layers of time lie beneath your feet? How many generations have lived, died, and turned to dust? The very dust we walk on every day. A single grain of sand might once have been a fragment of a tower, a tool, or a stone from a forgotten road. If this planet could remember, what would it tell us? Would it speak of the first one? Those who looked to the stars to measure time, who could read the seasons without calendars, who built structures so enduring that thousands of years later we still gaze at them with wonder and disbelief. If you're hearing this from a quiet place, maybe in your room under a warm light, or beneath a dark sky where only the night breathes, take a moment for silence. Think of the ground beneath you, the thin layer of dust on your table, the nameless stones by your door. Each grain, each fragment of earth is a page from a book that was never written, yet always exists, waiting to be opened. If the earth could speak, perhaps it wouldn't use words. It would tell its story through silence, through the breath of the wind, through the waves that endlessly erase and rewrite the old shorelines. It would speak of those who came before, those whose names even legend has forgotten. If these slow questions bring you peace, let yourself drift with them for a while. Let the dim light of curiosity guide you. You're here with Lunora, where history doesn't shout, it whispers. Now take a deep breath. Relax your shoulders. Close your eyes if you'd like. Together, we'll walk through the mist of time, to the place where perhaps every beginning is just a memory returning. We grow up with a comforting sense of certainty when we look back at history. The first textbooks told us that humanity began in simplicity, with fire, stone, and grass huts, then gradually advanced into empires, science, and the civilizations we know today. Everything was neatly placed on a timeline that felt solid and unbroken. 10,000 years ago came agriculture, 5,000 years ago writing, 3,000 years ago the pyramids, and then the rest, all leading to the present, to us, logical, tidy, easy to memorize. And yet, something in the way history is told leaves a faint unease, as if a page were missing, a chapter shortened, or a door never opened. Why are there structures we still can't explain, even with computers and satellites? Why do ancient maps depict Antarctica without ice, even though we only discovered it in the 19th century? And why, across lands separated by oceans, Egypt, Central America, Indonesia, do we find the same pyramids, the same celestial rituals, the same reverence for the stars? Could it be that we've been mistaken, not in the facts themselves, but in how we connect them? What if history doesn't move in a straight line, but bends like a circle, or folds like damp pages stuck together? What if between the lines we think we understand there are blank spaces, and those very spaces hold the truth? Ironically, the deeper we dig, the more history resists our order. Stone tools appear in layers of earth that make no sense on the conventional timeline. Ruins of ancient settlements lie buried beneath sediments formed hundreds of thousands of years ago. Each discovery is like a grain of sand falling into an hourglass already full, forcing us to turn it over. If history is a kind of collective memory, perhaps it functions like the mind of a person, never fully accurate, often distorted, remembering only what suits the present. We tend to recall what makes us proud and forget what makes us small. And in humanity's case, what's been forgotten might be humility, because if there was once a civilization before us, one more radiant, more advanced, then what we call our pinnacle today might be nothing more than the midpoint in an endless cycle. It's not the peak, but a passing turn, one of many that have risen and fallen, wiped away by fire, by water, or by time. And we, in our pride, may simply be narrating the middle of the story, unaware that others once told the beginning in languages no one understands anymore. Perhaps that's why the world's oldest myths, tales of a golden age, of gods who taught men to build temples, of beings who fell from the sky, all carry the same undertone, a time before time, an age of predecessors followed by a great catastrophe. From India, Greece and Egypt to the Maya, the Hopi and the Dogon, traces of that memory echo everywhere. Yet instead of being recorded and verified, that memory chose to live through symbols, circles, triangles, eyes, carved into stone, set in forests, buried beneath sand. Not meant to be understood immediately, but to wait for someone patient enough to decode them. Not meant to tell, but to remind. Something once existed here, even if no one remembers what it was. And that is what makes history so strange. It's not only what we read in books, but also what lingers between the margins, in the silence, in the faint sense that something is missing. Like a beautiful painting with its frame cut away, or a melody whose overture has been erased. And the moment we realize this, we begin to listen again, not only to what has been written, but to what has been buried, not only to the clear milestones, but to the quiet cracks between layers of time. For perhaps what we call recorded history is only the visible tip of a much deeper memory, a memory where the traces of the first civilization still lie hidden, waiting to be named once more. And as we begin that search, the next question arises: if such a civilization truly existed, where on earth has it been hidden? The answer doesn't lie in maps, nor does it shine clearly through the lines of recorded history. It lies within the planet itself, in every grain of soil, every layer of stone, every hidden vein of water. The earth, though silent, has never stopped recording. Not with words, but with strata. Not with voices, but with the quiet patience of sediment. It does not forget. It simply waits for the right moment to speak. Geology tells us that each layer of sediment is a chapter in time, Like pages made of stone, they stack gently upon one another after every volcanic rain, every retreating tide, every melting age of ice. Within those layers lie fossils, pollen, shards of pottery, and ashes. But there are also things unseen: distorted magnetic fields, bent sound waves, oddly rearranged stone formations, clues that only reveal themselves to those who look with patience and humility. And when they do, they whisper the same unsettling thought: perhaps something once stood there that does not belong to our known present. Some archaeological sites astonish not because of their size, but because of their depth. Foundations buried beneath layers of earth far older than the supposed age of humankind civilization. Sometimes it's just a single, perfectly straight-cut stone, a detail that seems ordinary yet impossible for the technology of its time. Sometimes it's a carved symbol, hidden deep inside a cave, at an angle impossible to draw without light reflected by mirrors. Tiny details, scattered across continents, that begin to form a quiet pattern, a kind of language spoken softly, persistently, like waves striking a cliff for thousands of years. The earth doesn't just preserve, it tests us. The most fragile traces often lie beneath the sea, where water levels have risen more than 100 meters since the last ice age. Along the continental shelves, explorers continue to find strange formations, terraces, corridors, straight walls, hundreds of meters below the surface. No inscriptions explain them, no monuments recount their stories, only stone, water, and silence. Silence, but not complete stillness, because sometimes fragments resurface, like forgotten dreams rising in the mind. Structures that align perfectly with the stars. Monuments built according to the golden ratio with uncanny precision. Stone maps depicting coastlines that were buried beneath the sea tens of thousands of years ago. How did ancient people know the shape of Antarctica when it was still covered in ice? How did they construct symmetrical designs that modern laser scanners can barely comprehend? And why do these same patterns repeat across civilizations supposedly unconnected by geography or time? When we look again at the layers of the earth, we begin to realize perhaps history hasn't been lost, only buried. Buried beneath ash, beneath ocean water, beneath the weight of time itself, hidden from eyes that only see the present, buried in a memory too vast for a single lifetime to understand. And like all memories, some truths emerge only when we are ready to face them. Geologists call Earth a self-balancing system, but from another point of view, it's more like an ancient librarian, one who never volunteers to tell the story, but never refuses anyone patient enough to read. The real question is, do we truly read, or do we only skim the first few pages and rush to our conclusions? Because within those layers of seemingly lifeless stone, there may still lie hints of a civilization long before ours, one that lived, loved, built, fell, and disappeared without saying goodbye. They may not have left behind language, but they left rhythm. No books, but geometry and astronomy repeated through time. No names, but metaphors, drawn again and again through myths that seem unrelated, yet echo the same forgotten pattern. And perhaps, like those stacked layers of earth, each civilization doesn't replace the one before it, but rests upon it, which means we might be living atop foundations we don't even know exist, walking roads once laid by nameless hands, building homes over sanctuaries long forgotten. And if that's true, then the question is no longer, was there someone before us, but rather, are we ready to remember? We have a strange habit. When we look at the past, we use ourselves as the measure. Modern thinking makes us believe that intelligence must go hand in hand with technology, as we define it today: electricity, steel, machinery, microchips. So when we find no signs that resemble our own, no cables, no engines, no concrete, we quickly conclude there was no advancement there. But that's like trying to find an ancient symphony by searching for a CD. We forget that a civilization might have evolved in a completely different direction, with its own language, its own tools, and an entirely different concept of progress. Maybe they didn't build cars, or maybe they learned to communicate with the Earth's magnetic field. Maybe they didn't invent electricity, but harnessed energy through the frequencies of stone. Maybe they didn't raise buildings from steel, but learned to use sound resonance to shape monolithic stone into perfect harmony.
And if that's the case, would we even recognize them? Imagine an archaeologist of the far future unearthing our remains 20,000 years from now. Would they understand what a smartphone once was, if all that remained were shards of plastic and fragments of circuitry? Would they be able to read the digital language, or would they simply label it unknown synthetic artifact, late industrial culture, and move on?
Now, reverse the thought. If a civilization before us once existed, one that developed in a completely different direction, not through physical technology but through abstract knowledge, then our failure to recognize them might not mean they left no trace. It might mean we simply don't know how to see it. To the modern mind, progress is measured by the ability to control matter. But what if there was a civilization whose progress lay in its ability to harmonize with nature, to draw energy from crystal vibrations, to understand the collective frequencies of thought, or even to expand consciousness beyond physical limits? Would we call that advancement, or dismiss it as myth? Many scientists today remain skeptical of ancient legends, stories of beings descending from the sky, of ages of light, of cities beneath the sea. They are neatly held under symbolism or myth. Yet if we look again with an open mind, we might realize perhaps those stories aren't wrong. Perhaps we're simply translating them with the wrong grammar. When the ancients spoke of gods who taught humans how to farm, maybe they weren't describing supernatural beings at all, but survivors, remnants of an earlier civilization, the keepers of memory after catastrophe. Their stories retold, reshaped through generations, until listeners could no longer tell where the human ended and the divine began, where technology became indistinguishable from miracle. The issue isn't the lack of evidence, it's how we define what evidence even means. We readily believe that ancient people could drag stones for hundreds of miles to build pyramids with near-perfect precision, yet we refuse to consider that they might have inherited or been taught advanced techniques from those who came before. We accept that prehistoric tribes could cross frozen continents to reach the Americas, yet we laugh at the idea of an ancient maritime civilization that mapped and navigated the seas long before our known histories began. We cling to our frameworks because they make us feel secure. But sometimes those very frameworks are the walls that block our sight. Perhaps if a pre-age civilization truly existed, They never sought permanence as we do. They understood cycles: birth, growth, decay, and renewal. They didn't try to be remembered, they left symbols instead. Quiet whispers meant for the future. A language without words, waiting only for those who know how to listen. So the real question isn't whether they existed, it's whether our own kind of progress has blinded us to what came before, whether we've become so fast, so certain, that we've forgotten how to ask. Maybe the greatest civilizations weren't the ones that left the most monuments, but the ones that learned how to step gracefully out of memory, leaving behind only gentle clues for those who seek.
And if such beings once walked this earth, perhaps they never truly vanished. Perhaps they're simply waiting for someone patient enough to look back.
Before there was writing, history lived through the voice. And before words became epics, they existed as legends. Stories whispered by the firelight, told through long nights, repeated across generations. Not for entertainment, but for remembrance. It was how humanity resisted forgetting. The strange thing is this: across the world, among cultures that never touched each other by modern geography, the same kind of memory appears, of a first radiant age of wisdom and harmony that once existed, a golden age now gone, swept away by flood, by fire, or simply by time. In ancient Greece it was called the Golden Age, a time when humankind lived in peace with the gods. There was no war, no illness, no hunger. The trees bloomed on their own, the fruits grew heavy on the branches, and people needed no labor. Then came the ages of silver, bronze, and iron, each one a step further from purity, a slow descent into forgetfulness. In India, this same rhythm appears through the yuga cycles of the Vedas: Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali. The first, Satya Yuga, was an age of truth and harmony when people lived for 1,000 years in peace and wisdom. But as the cycles turned, virtue declined, knowledge dimmed, and now we live in Kali Yuga, the age of confusion where war spreads and truth is inverted. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi the first time, when divine beings ruled the earth before humans took over. Gods like Thoth, Osiris, and Isis were not merely symbols, but described as real presences, walking the land, teaching knowledge, shaping order out of chaos. They founded sacred centers like Heliopolis and Abydos, and from them the structure of civilization began. In Central America, the Maya spoke of the worlds that were created and destroyed before ours. According to the Popol Vuh, the gods first made humans from mud, then from wood, and finally from corn. Only when made from corn did life truly begin. Yet before that, entire worlds had risen and fallen, each one a memory of people who had lived, known, and dreamed before us. Among the Hopi of North America, it is said humanity has already lived through 3 worlds, and we now inhabit the 4th. Each of the previous ones ended in fire, in ice, in flood, because of human pride, because balance with nature was lost. Only a few were carried over to preserve memory for the next beginning. The Dogon people of West Africa tell of visitors from the star Sirius, beings who came not to conquer, but to teach. Strangely, the Dogon knew of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, only confirmed by modern telescopes in the 20th century. Where did that knowledge come from, if not from a deeper memory? Even the Aboriginal peoples of Australia in their Dreamtime stories speak of a world before time, when the earth had no shape. They tell of the first beings, giants who sang the land into existence, whose voices carved rivers and mountains, leaving their footprints in stone, teaching humanity how to live in harmony with sky and soil. When gathered together, these stories are too alike to be coincidence. They follow the same pattern: a radiant first age, a gradual fall, a great catastrophe, and a rebirth from the ruins. They do not tell of a beginning, but of a beginning again. Not of a single act of creation, but of a recurring cycle, a cosmic heartbeat where memory hides between what remains. And in every version, one detail stands out. Humanity does not rise alone. It is guided by gods, by beings of higher wisdom, or by those who came from afar. Perhaps they were divine, perhaps they were simply survivors of an earlier world, the keepers of memory after collapse, the sowers of new seeds. It is difficult to call this historical fact in the academic sense, but it is equally difficult to dismiss it all as fiction. Because if it were pure imagination, why did every culture imagine the same things? Why do stories of floods, decline, and the first time appear everywhere, in every age, among every people? Perhaps myth is simply the form that memory takes when no one is left to write, when no one remains to remember. Fragments wrapped in symbols, so they would never be entirely lost. And if that's true, then listening to ancient legends is not superstition nor nostalgia. It's opening a small door into humanity's deepest archive, a place where the past has never truly vanished, only withdrawn into the soft flicker of bedtime stories. And maybe, within those dreams that belong to no one and everyone, we will begin to hear it again, a faint call rising from far away. When we hear the phrase lost civilization, three names rise almost instinctively: Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu. Though dismissed by mainstream academia as myth, metaphor, or the product of a romantic imagination, they persist, not as established truths, but as unanswered questions. Something about these names refuses to fade. Perhaps because they are more than stories. Perhaps they are memories encoded in images of something that once existed, that fell, and was never properly buried. The tale of Atlantis first appeared in Plato's Timaeus and Critias, not as fantasy, but as a moral parable. He described a vast island greater than Libya and Asia combined, lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. There, a powerful and enlightened civilization flourished, rich, organized, and advanced, till pride and greed brought about its own destruction. Plato didn't call it a legend. He claimed it was a story passed down from Egyptian records, collected by the sage Solon. From then on, Atlantis became the symbol of a world that reached the pinnacle of civilization, only to be swallowed by a great catastrophe, a flood, an earthquake, or some unknown cataclysm that erased it from history. But the idea of a sunken land is not unique to Greece. In the Himalayas, Tibetan Buddhist texts speak of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom that once existed in the material world, now accessible only through inner vision. In India, the ancient Tamil texts tell of Kumari Kandam, a vast continent that once connected India to Antarctica, said to be the cradle of the Dravidian civilization. And across the Pacific, island traditions still whisper of Mu, a great landmass between Hawaii and Tahiti, which sank beneath the ocean when the hearts of men lost harmony with the heavens. Lemuria came later in the 19th century. Originally, a scientific hypothesis to explain the strange distribution of lemurs between Madagascar and India. Though geology later disproved it through plate tectonics, the name was revived by mystics and theosophists who spoke of an ancient people, tall, luminous, spiritually advanced beings who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago, communicating by thought and attuned to higher energies. If only one story like Atlantis existed, it could easily be dismissed. But when the same motif, a lost land, a great fall, a vanished world beneath the sea, appears everywhere, from South America to Africa to Asia, we are faced with two possibilities. Either humanity shares an extraordinary collective imagination, or we are remembering something our ancestors once knew, once saw, once feared, and tried to retell in every way they could. Modern science demands physical evidence, stone, bone, tools, ruins. But memory doesn't always choose to survive that way. Perhaps civilizations like Atlantis didn't leave monuments of stone, but monuments of story, spiritual images that outlive destruction by embedding themselves in culture. And when an image survives thousands of years, repeated by countless tongues, can we really call it coincidence? Curiously, every legend of a drowned continent carries another common thread: lost knowledge. The people of Atlantis, according to Plato, harnessed water, energy, and the movements of the stars. The Lemurians, it was said, lived in deep harmony with nature and mastered the frequencies of consciousness. The people of Mu used crystals to store energy and information. Different details, same theme. These were not primitive tribes, but civilizations that had walked far along the path of spiritual, cultural, and scientific evolution before destroying themselves. Perhaps these are allegories of arrogance, of imbalance, but perhaps they are also warnings, faint echoes from a past that reminds us of what humankind can reach and what it can lose. Today, researchers are re-examining sites like the Yonaguni Monument off Japan, the Gulf of Cambay off India, and submerged mountain ranges in the Pacific, where sonar has revealed geometric structures too deliberate to be purely natural. Nothing is proven, but a question grows louder. If a civilization like Atlantis did exist, perhaps it was never just an island, but a global network, a web of cities and knowledge now lying silent beneath the waves, erased from the surface but not from the memory of humankind. And perhaps, like the image of Atlantis that refuses to die, those civilizations are still waiting for us, not to be believed, but to be understood. Among all the ancient legends that echo across human cultures, none is more universal than the story of the Great Flood. From the snow-capped peaks of Tibet to the plains of Mesopotamia, from the islands of the Pacific to the Andes and the African savannas, everywhere there are stories that begin the same way. One day the waters rose and swallowed everything. We usually interpret these tales as moral allegories, divine punishment, or the cleansing of a corrupted world. But when you place them side by side with their astonishing repetition of details, timing, and consequence, another possibility emerges. Perhaps humanity did once witness a global catastrophe together. Let's begin with Gilgamesh, the ancient Sumerian epic written over 4,000 years ago. In it, the god Enlil decrees the destruction of humankind through a great flood. A man named Utnapishtim is warned, builds a massive boat, gathers his family and all living species, and after the waters recede, releases birds to find dry land, finally resting upon a mountain. a story that centuries later would reappear in familiar form in the book of Genesis. There, in the tale of Noah, God too sends a flood to purge the earth of human sin. Noah builds an ark, shelters his family and the animals, and after 40 days of rain sends out a dove until his vessel comes to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. The Greeks tell of Deucalion and Pyrrha who survive after Zeus drowns the human race and repopulate the world by casting the stones of Mother Earth behind them, from which new people are born. The Hopi of North America recall that the previous world was drowned because humans lost harmony with creation. Only those who followed the sacred voice and dug deep with the ants were saved to begin again. The Maya speak of an earlier world, the age of wooden people, destroyed by water, fire, and monsters, because those humans lacked souls. In China, the legend of the Great Flood from the time of Yu the Great tells of decades of devastating deluge that fractured the land and starved the people until Yu mastered the waters and restored order to the world. Even in Australia, Aboriginal traditions remember the sea rising and swallowing ancestral lands. They still describe the old shorelines, matching remarkably well with coastal areas now buried beneath the waves. More than 2,000 flood stories have been recorded across the globe. Some are mythic, but many contain geographic, astronomical, or cultural details consistent with archaeological and geological evidence. After the last ice age, around 11,700 years ago, Earth experienced violent climate shifts. Massive ice sheets melted rapidly, raising sea levels by over 100 meters within a few millennia, submerging coastal plains worldwide. Regions like Doggerland, between Britain and Europe, Sunderland, modern Indonesia, and the continental shelves of India, Japan, and the Pacific once hosted thriving human settlements, now resting silently beneath the sea. Beyond rising waters, geological evidence points to enormous glacial lake outbursts, floods releasing billions of cubic meters of water into the oceans, along with meteor impacts, volcanic eruptions, and abrupt climate collapse that plunged the planet into chaos. If humanity had already been living and evolving before this, then the Great Flood was not merely a disaster, it was an incision into memory itself, an event so vast it erased nearly every trace from the surface, so sudden that the survivors could only pass it down through symbols and speech, stories that we now call myths. And in nearly all those stories, a pattern repeats. A few are chosen to survive, to remember, to become the seeds of a new world. They rebuild from nothing, carrying with them a faint, inherited memory of what was lost. They tell their stories not to glorify, but to warn. So perhaps the flood myths were never meant to explain nature, but to remind us that arrogance, imbalance, and forgetfulness always carry a price. And if that's true, then the most frightening thing isn't that a civilization once fell, but that we might be repeating the same fall in a new cycle, with greater knowledge, greater power, and the same forgetfulness. If the memory of the Great Flood is real, if sea levels truly rose more than 100 meters after the last ice age, then one question must be asked with absolute seriousness. What lies beneath the water? Not all ancient life unfolded on land. Just like us today, our distant ancestors would have settled near coastlines, where rivers met the sea, where climates were mild, the continental shelves flat, the soil fertile, and the resources abundant. If there had ever been an early civilization, even just towns or proto-cities, Their first traces would almost certainly now lie drowned beneath the same waves that so many cultures still remember in their tales of destruction. Today, those very regions, once deltas, estuaries and shorelines, are buried under the sea, sealed beneath tens of meters of sediment, and, astonishingly, have barely been explored in any systematic way. Yet the first clues are beginning to surface. Let's start with Doggerland, a vast plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, now lying under the North Sea. Around 10,000 years ago, it was a rich grassland where hunter-gatherers camped, hunted, and roamed freely. But as the seas rose, Doggerland slowly vanished beneath the waves. To this day, fishermen still haul up human bones, stone tools, and petrified wood from the sea floor. Sonar imaging has revealed ancient river channels and flat plateaus that could once have supported entire settlements. Farther east, off the western coast of India, lies one of the most debated underwater discoveries, the Gulf of Cambay, now called the Gulf of Kambat. In 2001, Indian scientists using sonar mapping detected symmetrical structures 30 meters below the surface, geometric lines, rectangles, and circular patterns stretching for kilometers. Artifacts, including pottery fragments, stone tools, and fossilized wood, were retrieved and carbon dated. Some samples yielded dates as old as 9,500 years, a time when, according to mainstream history, humans were still scattered tribes without urban organization. Some called it the world's oldest sunken city. Others dismissed it as coincidence, natural formations, or artifacts mixed from different eras. But the question had been asked, and remains unanswered. Now to Japan, where another underwater mystery stirs debate, the Yonaguni Monument. Submerged near the Ryukyu Islands, it features broad terraces, sharp right angles, and stair-like steps carved into solid rock. There are tunnels, corridors, and markings that resemble symbolic carvings. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura and others believe it to be the remains of a prehistoric civilization destroyed by earthquakes. Skeptics argue it's a natural sandstone formation shaped by erosion. But as with Cambay, the real question isn't what it is, but why it still hasn't been studied thoroughly. Perhaps it's because deep-sea archaeology is costly, complex, and technologically demanding, or perhaps it's because what lies beneath could upend the very timeline on which our idea of civilization rests. If cities exist beneath the oceans that predate 10,000 years, then we would have to rewrite the story of human origins, from Sumer and Egypt to the entire framework of cultural evolution taught today. And it's not only Asia. Across the Caribbean, Pacific, and Atlantic, similar anomalies appear. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans have revealed geometric stone structures nearly 700 meters deep, aligned like an ancient city grid. In the Bahamas, the Bimini Road, a series of rectangular limestone blocks arranged like a sunken causeway, still evokes Plato's Atlantis. Near Malta, deep underwater tracks carved into limestone twist and turn beneath the sea, as though ancient vehicles once passed there when the ground was still dry. Each site can be explained away as geology, coincidence, or imagination. But taken together, they begin to form a pattern. Submerged lands, geometric shapes, and ancient flood legends, all converging, as if trying to tell us something we aren't yet ready to hear. Perhaps these underwater cities are not proof of a lost civilization, but they are profound ones, demanding to be asked, not to prove a fantasy, but to acknowledge that the past of humankind may be far more intricate than our textbooks allow. Because if water took the most, it also preserved the most. Beneath layers of silt and salt, fossilized memories still rest. Not calling, not shouting, but waiting. Waiting for someone patient enough, humble enough, and curious enough to listen. And perhaps one day, in the dim blue light of the ocean floor, a single stone will begin to speak. Not in words, but in structure, not in language, but in presence. If only we can learn to understand that. Not everything began on land. Not all mysteries lie beneath the sea. Some stand openly beneath the sun and wind, monuments of stone, exposed, unmoving, defying the logic we use to measure time. They do not hide. They simply wait, overlooked yet unyielding. These are not symbols of faith or art alone. They are physical structures, with weight, volume, geometry, and purpose, yet they carry an absurdity so profound it challenges everything we think we know about human capability. At the top of that list stands a name that shook the world of archaeology in the late 20th century, Göbekli Tepe. Hidden beneath an unassuming hill in modern-day Turkey, Göbekli Tepe was discovered in 1994. When excavations began, archaeologists did not find a village. They found circles of massive stone pillars carved in the shape of T's, each up to 5 meters tall and weighing tens of tons. The stones were covered in detailed reliefs of animals and abstract symbols, arranged in deliberate astronomical patterns. But the shock came from the age. Carbon dating placed it at roughly 11,600 years old, long before the birth of agriculture, before Sumer or Egypt, before pottery, metal, or cities. According to conventional history, this was an era of small nomadic hunter-gatherers, not builders of megalithic temples. So who moved these stones? Who carved them with such mastery? Who aligned them with the stars before the first known civilization existed? Even stranger, after constructing Göbekli Tepe, the very people who built it buried it on purpose. It was not ruined by time, but intentionally sealed, as if to hide or protect it from the future. Why would anyone entomb their own masterpiece? What secret did it hold? From the Middle East we cross oceans to the high plateau of Altiplano in Bolivia. At nearly 4,000 meters above sea level near the shores of Lake Titicaca lies a site whose name may be quiet, but its mystery is thunderous, Puma Punku. Unlike the grandeur of the pyramids or the polished perfection of Incan walls, Puma Punku looks like rubble, yet its very brokenness is what baffles engineers. Here lie stones weighing over 100 tons, carved with laser-like precision into interlocking H-shapes and right angles so exact they could fit together like mechanical parts. The material? Andesite, a volcanic rock harder than steel. How, with Bronze Age tools, could anyone have achieved cuts so flawless that even a razor blade cannot slip between them? Modern engineers who have studied the site say the machining and alignment surpass anything the Tiwanaku culture, credited with building it, could have achieved. Some of the blocks appear modular, like prefabricated components designed to be assembled into a larger machine or structure, as if we are looking not at ruins of ritual, but at the remains of forgotten technology. Back in the Middle East, another enigma rises. Not drowned like Atlantis, not shattered like Puma Punku, but towering in silent defiance, Baalbek in present-day Lebanon. Famous for its Roman temples to Jupiter, its greatest mystery lies not above, But below, in the foundation, there rest the trilithon stones, megaliths weighing 800 to 1,000 tons each, stacked seamlessly without mortar on a platform so level that no crack has appeared in over 2,000 years. No record suggests the Romans possessed cranes or methods capable of moving such mass. So who placed them there? And when? Nearby lies another stone, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing about 1,200 tons, still half buried in its quarry. And more recently, a second stone was found beneath it, 1,600 tons, the largest ever cut by human hands, yet never moved. If the knowledge to move and position such stones existed once, why did it vanish completely? Where are the intermediate stages, the blueprints, the tools? Perhaps we have been looking at history the wrong way. Not every civilization evolves in a straight line. Maybe there were once peaks of mastery, not of metal and circuitry, but of sound, resonance, or forms of engineering that defy our current frameworks. And when those civilizations fell, all that remained were the stones, too heavy to move, too perfect to ignore. We can deny the interpretation, but we cannot deny the evidence. Those stones still stand. They do not plead for belief, they simply exist. And in each clean edge, each impossible cut, each pillar rising against the wind, there lies a quiet challenge from time itself. Do you truly understand your past? Perhaps when we look upon these monuments, not with the arrogance of descendants, but with the humility of listeners, one day the stones will finally begin to speak, not through words, but through the enduring perfection of their silence. We often think accurate maps began with the age of exploration, when sailors like Columbus, Magellan, and Vasco da Gama redrew the world with compass and sextant. But sometimes history slips quietly off its expected course, leaving behind small cracks that refuse to close. In a modest museum in Turkey lies what seems an unremarkable relic, a piece of worn gazelle skin covered in faint ink lines. At first glance, it's just an old map, but under careful study, scholars were stunned, because that fragment, drawn in 1513, shows the coast of South America with precision centuries ahead of its time. Even more astonishing, it depicts Antarctica, without ice, its mountain ranges and inlets drawn with accuracy that would not be confirmed until the 20th century through satellite and ground-penetrating radar. The map bears the name of its maker, Admiral Piri Reis, a navigator and cartographer of the Ottoman Empire. In his own notes, he wrote that it was compiled from more than 20 ancient sources, including maps from the time of Alexander the Great and others from ancient peoples whose names are now forgotten. For generations, that claim was ignored until the details forced historians to look again. How could a Renaissance-era map portray a continent discovered only in 1820? How could it show a coastline free of ice when Antarctica today lies buried beneath miles of it? One man who asked these questions was Charles Hapgood, a university professor whose research even caught the attention of Albert Einstein. Hapgood proposed that the Piri Reis map was based on far older source materials from before the end of the last ice age, when Antarctica's coast was still exposed. He argued that the map accurately shows subglacial features later confirmed by radar, implying it preserved data from a prehistoric survey of the Earth. And Piri Reis was not alone. In 1531, the cartographer Orontius Phineus drew another map of Antarctica, complete with rivers, mountains, and shorelines, strikingly close to modern measurements. Gerardus Mercator, father of the famous map projection, produced maps of the Arctic, showing 4 land masses circling a central mountain, a curious motif that echoes both Norse legends and Tibetan cosmology. Could it be that these Renaissance map makers were not inventing from imagination, but copying from fragments of an older, forgotten world map, inherited from a civilization whose knowledge had long vanished? Even more puzzling, the maps display mathematical and geographical sophistication well beyond their era. They employ precise spherical geometry, correct continental proportions, and accurate longitudinal relationships, achievements impossible without the precise chronometers that wouldn't exist for another 2 centuries. Hapgood advanced a daring hypothesis that an ancient civilization had once mapped the globe from a high vantage point, perhaps from the sky itself, using a level of surveying technology we no longer understand. Those maps, he suggested, were copied and recopied across millennia, degrading each time until the faint remnants survived as the puzzling artifacts we know today: the Piri-Reis map, the Phineas map, and others like them. Conventional academia dismissed the idea as fantasy, yet no one has explained how these maps contain information that only modern science and modern instruments could verify. No one can explain how 16th century cartographers without airplanes, satellites, or even accurate distance measuring tools could chart the world with such breathtaking precision. We prefer to think of knowledge as a straight line, each generation building upon the last. But perhaps some knowledge does not climb, it returns. Maybe once, long ago, humanity reached a level of understanding and then lost it, not from ignorance but from catastrophe. Like a scholar who loses his entire library to fire, our species too may have lost its greatest archive, not to war, but to the rising sea. If so, these ancient maps, fragile as old skin, faint as memory, are not answers. They are whispers, visual reminders that once someone saw the world whole from a vantage point we can only reach again with satellites and spaceflight. And if once upon a time they could draw the entire Earth, then the next question is not how, it is who and why we no longer remember them. In the academic world, there are things no one debates, no one refutes, no one even acknowledges, simply because they are not allowed to exist. It's not a matter of logic, but of structure. Each scientific field is a towering edifice built over centuries, every brick a premise, every flaw a theory agreed upon. So when someone uncovers a brick that doesn't fit, an impossible map, a structure out of time, a fossil in the wrong layer, the first reaction is not curiosity. It's denial, because if that one brick is real, the whole building could fall. Nowhere is this more evident than in archaeology and history. There is an official timeline, neat, linear, untouchable. Sumer, 6,000 years ago. Egypt, 5,000. Harappa, 4,500. Then Greece, then Rome, then medieval Europe. Every discovery, every hypothesis, every scrap of data must fit inside this chronological frame. If it doesn't, it's labeled pseudo-science, exiled to the margins before it can even speak. But what if the frame itself is the problem? History isn't a straight line, it's a fog, where memory, myth, and evidence mingle. And sometimes the things we can't explain are the most important clues of all. When ancient anomalies like the Piri-Reis map appear, mainstream scholars rarely refute the evidence directly. They refute the possibility that it could be real. They don't compare it with geological data or ice-penetrating radar. They simply say, no one could have drawn a map like that in 1513, therefore it must be coincidence. That isn't ignorance, it's the defense of a structure, a system of knowledge that has been cemented for centuries, and in protecting that structure, countless discoveries have been dismissed, shelved, or quietly forgotten. Not because they were disproven, but because they didn't fit. Archaeologists have found fossilized hammers encased in rock, millions of years old, man-made tunnels beneath geological strata, older than humanity itself, even wheel track impressions fossilized in limestone, hundreds of thousands of years ancient, all set aside as anomalies, not re-examined, not discussed, just inconvenient artifacts in a system that can't accommodate them. Because if even one of those finds were verified, it wouldn't just rewrite a chapter of history, it would rewrite the entire foundation upon which modern science rests. Degrees, textbooks, entire fields would need to be reconsidered, and so instead they're left unspoken, quietly filed away. Yet denial doesn't erase reality. When human footprints were discovered in volcanic ash in Mexico, dated at over 250,000 years old, long before humans were supposed to exist in the Americas, they weren't added to any textbook. They were described instead as an unexplained anomaly. A phrase that sounds cautious, but in truth, it's a retreat. Because to admit that humans walked the Americas hundreds of millennia ago would collapse our migration model entirely. It would mean our species' story, the one taught in classrooms, is not a line, but a labyrinth, and that would unsettle more than just the past. History, it turns out, is not merely about what was. It's about who holds the power to define what was. Whoever writes history decides who we are and where we came from. So not everything true is accepted, and not everything rejected is false. In that landscape, the independent thinkers, the quiet skeptics who keep asking what if, become the last guardians of open curiosity. They are not rebels against science, but keepers of its original spirit, to question, to wonder, to listen where silence has settled too long. Because if the true depth of history is far greater than we imagine, if a civilization once walked this earth before us, leaving scattered traces behind, then perhaps the real evidence doesn't rest in museums, but in the very things the system refuses to see. Like distant echoes from an age without a name, still calling, softly, for someone willing to listen. So if legend is a doorway, but then who closed it? Maybe. No one ever truly did. Perhaps, over time, we simply stop looking that way, because in a world that keeps reaching outward with maps, satellites, data, and speed, we've forgotten how to turn inward. And legends, you know, do not speak in noise. They whisper, softly, patiently, in silence. When the campfires went out, when stories became children's games, when the last storyteller died and no one took their place, the doorway didn't close out of will, but because no one walked toward it anymore. Generation after generation, we began calling the keepers of memory naive, superstitious, unreliable. We put our faith in what could be measured and dismissed what could not be replicated in a lab. And so quietly, legend was moved into the Museum of Folklore, treated not as a message, but as an artifact. But maybe the door was never locked. Maybe it's only covered in dust. And the key, it doesn't lie in archives or institutions, but in humility. Humility to admit we don't yet know everything. Humility to accept that ancient wisdom was not lesser, only spoken in another language, the language of symbols, of cycles, of dreams and stars. Some truths can't be written down. They are sung in old songs, performed in rituals passed through generations, or seen in the eyes of an elder gazing into the distance, repeating words their ancestors once whispered to the wind. And if one day you listen deeply enough, you may realize something simple, something timeless. Legends never disappear. They only wait for a listener, for an open mind, for a soul ready to remember, and perhaps that soul is yours. So if we truly wish to see more, to understand deeper, to remember what we were once taught to forget, then perhaps the first thing we must learn is the art of gentle doubt. Not the kind of doubt that destroys, but the kind that opens space. Quiet spaces where questions are allowed to exist without being crushed by the need for instant answers. Because when we stop seeing history as a wall of certainty and begin to treat it as a curtain that can be drawn aside, the world grows wider. Pay attention to the gaps, to the blurred footnotes in textbooks, to the phrases that read origin unknown, to the chapters rushed through as though they held nothing of value. Sometimes it's in those quiet absences that old memories still whisper. Listen to legend not as fairy tale but as the emotional archive of a civilization, a flood told in 100 ways across 100 lands may echo the same memory. A god emerging from the sea may be the dim reflection of a forgotten voyager. A story about a sacred mountain may be the residue of an ancient observatory. Do not be afraid when you find yourself believing in what others dismiss. For sometimes dismissal is a form of protection, a way of shielding the fragile. Memory, when too distant or too luminous, is often buried not because it's false, but because it's dangerous. Dangerous to everything we think we know about ourselves. And don't expect recognition from the world. The most profound discoveries rarely arrive with applause. They emerge in stillness, when one person, or a few, quietly connect the fragments that no one else bothered to gather. You may never find a complete map, no perfect temple, no official confirmation. But you may find traces, faint but steadfast, a symbol etched into stone, a myth passed down through generations, a dream that feels older than language, a question that refuses to fade. And those traces, soft, elusive, yet persistent, can guide you back to where the first dawn once shone. Not through spacecraft, not through technology, but through an inner voyage, where memory is not discovered but remembered, because perhaps you never truly forgot. You were simply never allowed to remember. Official history speaks with a loud, confident voice, but it is not the only one. On the margins, in the half-light, other voices still whisper. Unwritten stories, unrecorded songs, languages, customs and memories, never recognized, yet never completely gone. Where are they now? Not in capitals, not in museums, but in small coastal villages, in mist-covered valleys, on forgotten islands that modern maps overlook. They live in the memory of an old woman who never went to school, in the twilight tales told beside a hearth, in lullabies whose origins no one remembers, in faint carvings on stones that seem meaningless until you really look. In Indonesia, on a small island called Sulawesi, inside the cave of Liang Bulu Sipong 4, archaeologists found a crimson painting, a hunting scene 44,000 years old, perhaps the oldest known narrative artwork on Earth. But what makes it extraordinary is not its age, but its intent, hybrid human-animal figures, coordinated movement, tension, composition, all signs of symbolic thought. If people of the Stone Age could tell stories with such structure and imagination, then perhaps we have underestimated the minds of our ancestors. And maybe that wall painting is not just ancient art, but the first fragment of a world view, a philosophy, a civilization we have yet to name. In Japan, the underwater formations off Yonaguni still divide scholars. Some call them natural erosion. Others see terraces, sharp corners and stairways, too precise, too intentional. If they are man-made, they must date from before the sea rose, over 10,000 years ago. A sacred site, perhaps, a hidden one, or maybe a city that memory forgot. In India, the epic Mahabharata tells of wars so vast and weapons so fierce that modern readers often dismiss them as myth. Yet one passage speaks of a weapon bright as 1,000 suns, setting forests aflame, poisoning water, causing hair and nails to fall away. An allegory, perhaps. But if we ever find scorched earth fused into glass, regions with abnormal radiation, or cities abandoned in sudden silence, can we still call it only poetry? These places, neglected, ridiculed, erased from the center, might hold the missing pieces of a far older story. They are the dim background of our species' memory, the faint shimmer at the edge of human history, the last echoes from a time that no longer speaks in words, but still lingers in stone, in soil, in intuition. If history written in textbooks is linear, human memory is not. It twists, diverges, melts, and settles again. And in those narrow, overlooked corners, where few ever think to look, the greatest truths may still be waiting. History, for so long, has been treated as a solid structure. Layer upon layer, age upon age, arranged neatly like shelves in a well-kept archive. The Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and then us. It all seems so logical, so orderly. A story comfortably aligned with our sense of progress. But sometimes a single fragment slips out. Not because it's out of place, but because it simply doesn't fit. Archaeologists have a name for such anomalies: OOP arts, out-of-place artifacts. Ordinary objects found where they shouldn't exist, in times they shouldn't belong to. Take, for instance, a seemingly trivial story. In 1936, a couple walking near a river in Texas discovered a chunk of stone with a piece of wood embedded inside. Curious, they cracked it open, and there it was, a hammer, an iron head, a wooden handle. Nothing unusual, except the rock encasing it, according to some analyses, belonged to a geological layer roughly 100 million years old, the age of dinosaurs, long before humans were ever supposed to exist. A hoax? A freak of nature? Or perhaps a forgotten trace of a world we've never imagined? From Texas, the trail leads to Baghdad. In 1938, excavators near the ancient capital unearthed a small clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, heavily corroded. When filled with an acidic solution, it produced a faint electrical current. Researchers called it the Baghdad battery. If it truly functioned as a primitive cell, then thousands of years ago, someone understood electrochemical energy long before the modern concept of electricity. It wasn't a lithium battery, of course, but it suggested something deeper, that knowledge doesn't always travel forward. It loops, it's forgotten, and sometimes rediscovered. Far to the south, in South Africa, miners uncovered tiny metallic spheres with delicate grooves etched perfectly around their centers, found within rock layers estimated to be 2.8 billion years old. Some claim they're natural mineral formations. Others, examining their near-perfect symmetry, wonder, if natural, why only here? And why shaped with such deliberate geometry? We don't yet have definitive answers, but what's striking is how many such objects exist. They don't sit in museums, they're rarely mentioned in classrooms, yet they persist quietly in side notes, private archives, the margins of research papers, and the wary curiosity of young scholars. Because when you stumble upon something that doesn't fit, you're not just touching an artifact, you're touching a gap in our collective understanding. If there truly was a civilization before ours, one that built no pyramids, raised no empires, wrote no books, then maybe its only survivors are the things no one notices: a buried tool, a worn carving, a corroded mechanism, or perhaps just an idea. An idea whispering that what we know may not be all there is. That sometimes a doorway to the past doesn't open with certainty, but with a single, quiet question from an ordinary soul standing before the unexplainable. What is this, really? And in that moment, history begins to breathe again, not in sequence, but in rhythm with everything that has never been officially acknowledged. Not every trace of a civilization lies in stone, in pottery, or in tools shattered by time. Some traces, quieter, more fragile, live in knowledge, and because of that they are often overlooked. When understanding rises beyond the limits of its era, no one knows what to call it: intuition, genius, or the inheritance of a memory that no longer has words. We might begin with a map, as thin as paper, yet powerful enough to challenge the entire structure of world history. In the year 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis drew a map that baffled generations. It depicted the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and South America with uncanny accuracy, and more astonishingly, it included the southernmost part of the world, Antarctica. But what unsettled scholars wasn't its inclusion. It was how Antarctica appeared, without ice. Today we know that the Antarctic ice sheet is over a mile thick, and only modern radar can see the land beneath. Yet the map of Piri Reis seems to show precisely that, the contours of the continent below the ice. This leads to a startling possibility that his chart was based on even older sources, ancient parent maps, drawn when Antarctica was still green and rivered, perhaps 6,000 years ago or more. If that's true, who lived then to observe and measure it? And, more importantly, who had the ability to chart it with such precision? But the map is only one fragment. Ancient understanding also hides in smaller things, like a corroded lump of metal pulled from the seabed of the Aegean. At first, no one paid attention. Just another barnacled relic from a shipwreck. But when scientists X-rayed it and reconstructed its interior, they found something extraordinary. A complex astronomical machine of interlocking bronze gears able to predict lunar phases, solar movements, and planetary cycles with stunning accuracy. It became known as the Antikythera mechanism, and if the dating holds, it's over 2,000 years old, a device as precise as a medieval clock, yet crafted in a world without telescopes, without modern engineering. How? Could it be that the Greeks weren't the first to invent it, only the last to remember how? Perhaps this mechanism wasn't innovation, but echo, a surviving replica of knowledge passed down from a culture now forgotten. And if you think Greece was the exception, look again toward the pyramids. The three great monuments of Giza align perfectly with the three stars of Orion's belt, not only on the ground, but mirrored with celestial precision. Even more remarkable, this alignment fits not our sky today, but the position of the stars around 10,500 BC, a time when, by conventional history, no civilization capable of such architecture should have existed. How did the ancients know about the precession of Earth's axis, a cycle spanning 26,000 years? When modern science recognized it only a few centuries ago, it feels less like discovery and more like remembrance. A memory recalled, not newly found. Follow these traces long enough and a pattern emerges. Our ancestors didn't just make pottery, build shelters, or plant seeds. They understood the sky. They measured time by the shadows of the sun. They buried their dead in alignment with the rising stars. They raised circles of stone to mark the moon's rhythm, the floods, the harvests. This was not mere survival. It was knowledge. It was system. Perhaps knowledge itself is a kind of inheritance, one that needs no books. A heritage written not in language, but in patterns, cycles, harmonies, and symbols, carried through dreams, rituals, lullabies whispered by an ancient mother beside the fire, and in the gaze of those who once looked up at the night sky and remembered. When we look back now, we begin to see. The ancients were never primitive. Maybe they were simply recalling a fragment of something vast that once existed and then vanished. Not everything forgotten has ceased to exist. Some things are merely asleep, in an old map, in a rusted mechanism, in the silent axis of a pyramid, waiting for someone to listen closely and ask that timeless question. How did they know? There is something strange, almost mystical about the world's oldest cultures, separated by oceans and continents, speaking languages that share no root, living beneath icy peaks or under blinding tropical suns. And yet somehow they all remember the same thing, a great flood, not a seasonal storm or a swollen river, but something deeper, more violent, almost cosmic in its magnitude. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of the flood unleashed by the god Enlil to punish mankind. In India, the Satapatha Brahmana recounts how Manu was warned by the god Vishnu in a dream to build a vast boat before the waters came. In China, there is the legend of Yu the Great, who tamed the deluge that swallowed an ancient dynasty. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survived on a small ark after Zeus drowned the world in wrath. And in the book of Genesis, Noah preserved the seed of life as heaven poured down its judgment upon the earth. All the great civilizations, independent, isolated, separated by thousands of years, yet they all remember a flood. How could that be coincidence? Or were they all retelling the same memory, a real event, an ancient catastrophe that ended an age and washed away a civilization we have yet to name? Modern science, in truth, doesn't dismiss that possibility. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, Earth underwent a violent climatic shock, the event known as the Younger Dryas. Within mere decades, global temperatures swung wildly. Glaciers melted with terrifying speed. Sea levels rose over 120 meters, not gradually but in surges, like the planet itself gasping in anguish, dragging coastal plains and river deltas down into the deep. If there once existed a prehistoric civilization, one that had not yet written, had no time to carve its temples in stone, it would have vanished beneath those waves, its cities drowned in salt and silence. Have you ever wondered how many cities might lie beneath what is now the Bay of Bengal, or under the still waters off Japan? or below the blue depths of the Caribbean near Cuba, Africa, or India? Researchers who have turned their gaze beneath the sea have begun to find strange things. Rows of megalithic stones, terraces, submerged walls half buried in sediment. Off the coast of Dwaraka, India, lie what appear to be ancient foundations. Near Cuba, massive stone blocks arranged in geometric patterns. And off Yonaguni, Japan, a submerged monument that still divides archaeologists today. Some say these are natural formations, others insist they are ruins. No one can say for sure. But one thing is certain: water can erase everything. Carvings, walls, footprints, everything except memory. And that memory I bent and reshaped through generations, told in myth, in image, in dream, endures still, not as evidence, but as story. A crackling fire, a rolling thunder, a wave rising to swallow the world. The echo of something vast, a faint light flickering against the dark of forgetting. Because not all history is written in ink. Sometimes it survives as a whisper, a fleeting image, a feeling of endless rain. A silent boat adrift, a mountain rising from the flood. Things we can never prove, yet cannot quite erase from the human soul. On modern maps there is no space for Sunderland, for Doggerland, or for the long echoing name of Lemuria. But that doesn't mean they never existed. It only means they now live elsewhere, beneath the waves, within memory, or in the quiet void between questions that have never been answered. Let's begin in Southeast Asia, where islands gleam like scattered jewels between two great oceans. Indonesia, with its thousands of islands, seems eternal in its form. But if we turn back the clock some 20,000 years, when sea levels were more than 100 meters lower, the map changes completely. That world was not an archipelago, but a vast continent, Sunderland, uniting Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the lands now buried beneath the South China Sea. It was lush, threaded with rivers and fertile plains, a cradle of life. And it's not hard to imagine that something began there. Perhaps small fishing villages, perhaps great settlements, or perhaps an entire civilization whose echo remains only in stone, in legend, and in the mysterious terraces of Gunung Padang, a quiet hill in West Java where massive stone blocks are stacked in patterns that defy familiar order. Locals call it sacred ground. Modern geological surveys whisper something more, that it could be over 10,000 years old. If true, then Gunung Padang is not merely a ruin. It's a reminder that we have forgotten a chapter of our own story. Now move west beneath the cold waters of the North Sea to a place that sounds like fiction. Doggerland. Once it connected Britain to mainland Europe, not as a barren ridge, but as a wide green plain where humans hunted, gathered, and lived for generations. But when the ice melted and the seas rose, that world faded, not in a single day, but like a dream dissolving at dawn. Today, fishermen still pull from the deep the bones of men, the tools of hunters, and the petrified roots of ancient forests. No city has been confirmed there. But if ever one existed, if for a moment human hands built something enduring, the ocean would have erased it completely, leaving behind only fragments of memory tangled in nets and drilling rigs. And not all lost worlds drowned. Some were simply hidden, by time, by soil, by the slow reclaiming hand of nature. Take the Amazon. For centuries it was said no city could survive there, too wet, too wild, too poor in soil. But from above, through satellite eyes, lines begin to appear, circles, roads, grids too perfect to be natural. Beneath that dense green canopy may lie the remains of great urban centers, not built of stone, not crowned by pyramids, but living cities woven into the rhythm of the forest, home to millions who thrived not by defying nature but by blending with it. And when time turned against them, when disease, conflict, and collapse came, they withdrew. The jungle, slow and patient, covered their traces with vines and roots, wrapping the past in a green shroud. Perhaps they never sought to leave monuments, only lines, straight, quiet, waiting for eyes patient enough to see. And then there are those names that drift between myth and science. Lemuria, remembered in Tamil tradition, in Malagasy legend, and once proposed by early geographers to explain the mysterious spread of species across oceans. Or Mu, the fabled Pacific continent James Churchward claimed as the cradle of a radiant civilization, one that vanished in a single fateful day. Many dismiss these as fantasy. But if the same imagination repeats itself across cultures, across centuries, perhaps it is not fantasy at all, but memory, blurred, distorted, yet still reaching back toward the light. Because if we look at today's maps and assume they tell the whole story, we may be missing the most important part. The part that sank, the part that was swallowed, the part that was hidden. The story of humankind may not have begun on the continents where we now stand, but on lands that no longer rise above the sea. Perhaps we are rebuilding our memory from fragments, while the greater whole still lies below the waters, beneath the forests, beneath time itself, and within dreams that have yet to find their names. When everything falls, the cities, the homes, the monuments, what remains more than anything else are the symbols. Not because they are stronger than stone, but because their meaning always finds a way to survive. In legend, in ritual, in the repeated patterns no one quite remembers the reason for. Perhaps symbols are the last memories time has not yet erased. And then a quiet question rises: how many of the symbols we still use today, unconsciously in our rituals, our art, our brands, even our dreams, are echoes of an age long forgotten? Think of the spiral, a simple curve, yet found everywhere, on the cave walls of Gavrinis, the tomb of Newgrange, the carvings of Malta, Peru, and Anatolia. Perfect whorls cut deep into stone, resting in darkness for millennia, as though waiting for someone to look and remember what they once meant. Were they suns, calendars of time, or something else entirely? Something we've lost the language to understand. The deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. The same shapes, the same signs repeating across cultures that never met, across continents divided by oceans, across millennia with no shared books or alphabets. And yet, the symbols are almost identical, as if they were all copied from the same ancient book, a book whose cover burned away long ago. Long before cuneiform appeared in Sumer, the Balkan people carved hundreds of small signs now called the Vincha symbols, simple, haunting marks. They don't form lines or sentences. They appear scattered, solitary, like fragments of speech caught mid-thought. To this day, no one can read them. And far away, on a lonely island in the Pacific, another mysterious script emerged, Rongorongo, carved into wood, undeciphered still. No texts, no translations, just lines of symbols that look like writing, but speak a grammar no living mind remembers. If this was truly a written language, it would be one of the very few to have evolved in total isolation. But what startles us most is not its age, it's its solitude. It feels like the last voice of a knowledge system that forgot its own name. We're told that cultures without writing were primitive. But what if it's the other way around? What if these marks are the final relics of a way of thinking far more sophisticated, more intuitive than we can now grasp? A symbol doesn't need grammar, it doesn't explain, it reminds. In oral cultures, symbols weren't decorations, they were memory containers. A single spiral could stand for a song, a ritual, an entire story passed through generations. A crescent might signal the rising floods or the soul's return after death. At Göbekli Tepe, a 12,000-year-old sanctuary, there are no words, only symbols, animals, moons, sacred geometry. Not by accident. These shapes were conceptual codes, meant not to be read, but to be felt. You don't decode them, you enter them. You let your eyes rest on the stone and sense a rhythm, a quiet pulse moving through your mind. If the first civilization truly existed, perhaps they didn't use alphabets as we know them. Perhaps they spoke a language of images, where repetition was syntax, shape was syllable, and light itself, striking at the right moment, revealed messages invisible to the ordinary eye. Ancient symbols don't ask to be solved, they ask to be listened to. And maybe in our modern world overflowing with words, noise, and an explanation, we've lost the most essential skill of all, the ability to listen to what has no voice, because perhaps the most important messages the first civilization left for us were never meant to be written, only drawn, repeated, until one day someone would look and remember. If history leaves its traces in stone, then perhaps the world's memory still echoes through sound. Not through speech, not through song as we know it, but through vibration, soft, slow, enduring, sometimes reduced to faint tremors hidden within mountains, within rock, within wind, echoes without words, but still with frequency, not meant for the ear, but for something deeper that listens within. When you step into an ancient cave, the first thing you hear is not the voice of those who once stood there, but silence, a dense, living silence, as if the cave itself is listening to you. And then, the moment your foot touches the ground or your hand brushes the wall, sound stirs. It travels outward, ripples and returns, a reply that feels like it has been waiting for thousands of years. Archaeologists have long noticed something strange. In caves adorned with prehistoric art, Chauvet, Lascaux, Bimbetka, the painted caves of Sulawesi, the images always appear where the acoustics are strongest, where echoes linger, where sound amplifies itself. They didn't paint randomly, they chose the spots that resonated. Why? Perhaps those paintings were not meant only to be seen, but to be heard. Imagine ancient rituals where sound, image, and consciousness intertwined. The artists were not merely painters. They were tone makers. They drummed on stone. They breathed into bone flutes. They lit fires that crackled in rhythm, not for performance, but to unlock states of awareness, to open a door between worlds. No language, only frequency. Now imagine a civilization so old that it left no writing, no temples, only resonance. They didn't build for the eye, they built for the echo. They created chambers where the voice of the earth could vibrate with the human body, changing mood, slowing the heart, deepening awareness. From the stone temples of Malta to the tomb of Newgrange to the heart of the Great Pyramid, each resonates strongly at a precise tone, around 110 hertz, a frequency that modern science associates with deep, meditative brain states. Coincidence? Or the remnant of an ancient understanding of acoustic consciousness, a technology of feeling rather than of tools? In a world without electricity, without networks, without writing, sound was communication, the heartbeat of the tribe, the call through the dark, the hum of stone responding to touch. Perhaps the first civilization understood this better than we ever will. They did not need to write. They resonated. They did not say, "This is truth." They built spaces that made you feel truth. They spoke through architecture, through air, through silence. Their messages were not read. They were experienced. So the real question is not what did they say, but what did they create that made others grow quiet, soften, and begin to listen within themselves? When we open our ears to silence, not seeking voices but sensing vibration, we start to understand what remains from that first civilization may not lie in matter at all, but in rhythm. Something intangible, yet universal. Something no one can hold, yet anyone can feel, if they are still enough. And if that's true, then the places we call sacred, the deep caves, the ancient forests, the echoing mountains, may in fact be the recording studios of memory, where a forgotten civilization once sang to the earth, and the earth even now still hums their song. Could it be that the oldest inheritance of humankind is not buried in the earth, but in the mind itself? Modern neuroscience tells us that the brain does not store memory like a reel of film. Each recollection is a reconstruction, fragments of sound, image, and emotion pieced together anew every time we remember. So what if an ancient memory once existed, not of a single person, but of an entire civilization? And what if, unconsciously, we are still reassembling it? Through dreams, through myths, through the strange creative impulses that seem to come from nowhere. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a deep, shared layer of the human psyche, where archetypes live: the mother, the hero, the serpent, the flood, the lost city. They surface in Gilgamesh and the Book of Genesis, in the Ramayana, in Norse sagas, different names, same shapes. We think of them as psychological metaphors, but what if they are the fossilized memories of something that truly happened, the echo of a forgotten age still vibrating through the human mind? Some researchers have observed children who, before the age of 5, speak of places, people, and events they could never have known, memories with no apparent source. Maybe it's imagination, or maybe every one of us carries an invisible seed of remembrance, passed down not through language, but through consciousness itself. Is it coincidence that every ancient tradition speaks of a golden age now lost? Atlantis, Lemuria, Zep-Tepi of Egypt, Krita Yuga and Satya Yuga of the Vedas. We assume these are fantasies, projections of yearning. But what if they are not nostalgia for a paradise that never existed, but remembrance of a world that once did? And notice something else, subtle yet universal. From the first observatories of Nabta Playa to Stonehenge, Angkor Wat, and Machu Picchu, humanity has always turned its gaze upward, not just to mark seasons or measure time, but as if searching for something once known, a connection lost, a home beyond the sky. Perhaps the first civilization left us more than tools and symbols. Perhaps it left us a way of seeing, a quiet understanding that we are not separate, that something vast and ancient still moves within us, remembering itself through our eyes. When you sit in stillness at night, and a strange image rises in your mind that you cannot explain, when you feel a deep longing for something unnamed, as if you are missing a world you've never seen. Perhaps it isn't fantasy. Perhaps it is an echo carried through millennia, calling softly from a forgotten age, from a place without coordinates, from a time that has no name. And if you listen long enough, truly listen, you might realize the voice has always been inside you, not a memory returning to you, but you returning to memory. Across the continents, from the high plains of Peru to the deserts of Egypt, from the Indus Valley to islands scattered across the seas, the stones remain. Not fallen by accident, not shaped by nature's whim, but assembled, cut, aligned, vast, deliberate, silent. They stand like the fossilized memories of a hand that once shaped the world. We know that Egypt built its pyramids. We believe the Inca carved Sacsayhuaman. We attribute Baalbek's monumental terrace to the Romans, but beneath those neat attributions lies a question that refuses to fade. How? How do you lift and fit a block of stone weighing 1,200 tons, heavier than a modern locomotive, without iron tools, without cranes, without mortar, and still have the edges locked so perfectly that a blade of grass cannot slip between them? How does such precision survive for millennia while our concrete crumbles in centuries? At Puma Punku in Bolivia, blocks of andesite, harder than steel, have been cut into perfect H shapes, every angle exact, every groove uniform, as if machined by technology that should not have existed. Who carved them? How were they moved? And most haunting of all, why? In Baalbek, Lebanon, 3 stones known as the trilithon rest upon each other, each nearly 20 meters long, each close to 1,000 tons. Even today, only a few of the world's largest cranes could lift them, and none could position them so precisely upon a leveled platform that has not shifted for 2,000 years. It becomes harder not to wonder, were these structures the legacy of a cycle of civilization older than we know, a cycle whose technologies and principles were forgotten while later cultures merely built atop the remnants? Because the stones are not alone. They share something deeper. Geometry, ratios, alignments, astronomical correspondences, the same sacred mathematics found from Giza to Teotihuacan, from Angkor Wat to Easter Island. Lines of latitude, golden proportions, solstice markers, patterns too consistent to be coincidence. Could it be that the Earth once formed part of a global design, a network of energy and knowledge laid out by a civilization that saw the planet not as nations but as one resonant field? Perhaps these megaliths were never mere tombs or temples. Perhaps they were solidified frequencies, tuning forks of stone, resonant memory devices built to vibrate with the planet itself. Maybe when sunlight passes through at the right angle, when moonlight strikes the axis, when a voice whispers between pillars at the precise harmonic, the place responds, not with movement, but with remembrance. If memory can survive in the human mind, in symbols, in sound, then perhaps stone remembers too, not in neurons, but in resonance. Each monolith may be a question cast in rock, posed to us by ancestors who once understood how matter and consciousness intertwine. Maybe the megaliths were never built to impress the eye. Maybe they were built to awaken the ear of the soul, to remind us every time we stand before them that the story of civilization did not begin with us. It began with a sound, a vibration, a memory, carved into stone, waiting for someone, somewhere, to listen again. Perhaps the first libraries of humankind were never carved in stone, but written across the sky. We dig the earth for ruins, sift through ashes for proof, weigh the silence of stone for meaning. But what if those who came before us did not leave their story in the ground? They left it above it? What if their knowledge was not buried but orbiting, etched into the rhythm of the stars themselves? It seems impossible to imagine that an ancient civilization could have understood the positions of planets, the dance of comets, the tilt of Earth, or the long precession of equinoxes. And yet, the evidence whispers otherwise. Across the world, from Stonehenge in Britain to Chanquillo in Peru, from the temples of Abu Simbel in Egypt to the observatories of the Maya at Uxmal, a pattern repeats. Each monument speaks the language of the heavens. These are not coincidences. They are alignments, deliberate, precise, consistent, as if humanity once shared a celestial memory, a vision of time written not in years but in light. Look up at the night sky. To the untrained eye it is a field of stillness, but to those who truly watched, generation after generation, it was alive. The ancients were not stargazing for beauty, they were remembering. The heavens were their archive, storing what the earth could not keep. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids to the belt of Orion, the celestial body of Osiris, god of rebirth. The Maya built El Castillo so that on the equinox, sunlight would descend its steps as a serpent of light, a ritual reminder that time, like spirit, always returns. Different continents, different tongues, one intention, to keep time with the sky. Could it be that long before clay tablets and alphabets, humanity once shared a language of light, a way of reading and writing through the movement of the sun, moon, and stars? They did not speak it. They watched it. Each sunrise was a syllable, each lunar phase a sentence, each eclipse a warning or a promise. And what if those myths of beings from the stars, of boats of fire, and gods descending in beams of light were not fantasy but fractured recollections? Not stories about them, but us, in a time before the flood, before amnesia, when we still conversed with the cosmos. Some even suggest, cautiously, dreamingly, that traces of this lost cycle may linger beyond our world, in the dust of the moon, in the cold valleys of Mars, in orbiting stones that once served as markers, messages awaiting a species ready to recognize its own handwriting. If so, the question is no longer whether they existed, but whether we can still recognize them. Perhaps when you gaze at the stars tonight, you are not merely looking outward, you are being looked at by memory itself. Every constellation, every orbit, every pulse of light may be a greeting from the first civilization, a quiet reminder across the dark. We were here. We watched the same sky. And one day you would remember, if the sky is the archive of light, then the earth itself is the library of silence. For while the stars remember what once shone, the soil remembers what once slept. Not all who lived before turned to dust. Some stories remained, compressed between layers of stone, murmured through generations under names that sound like myth: Agartha, Shambhala, Patala, Derinkuyu, names not of fantasy, but of memory. Beneath modern Turkey, an entire world was uncovered. Derinkuyu, a city carved 85 meters deep into volcanic rock. It had homes and churches, granaries and wells, ventilation shafts, tunnels wide enough for caravans, and circular stone doors that could seal the city from within. People once lived down there, not for days or weeks, but long enough to create a structured society, complete with religion, trade, and governance. Who were they? Why did they descend? And where did they go when the silence returned? Were they hiding from something, or had they never lived above at all? From the honeycombed caves of Cappadocia to the Indian tales of Patala, the underworld realm of the serpent deities, the Naga, the vision of a hidden kingdom beneath the earth, reappears in every culture. In Greek and Egyptian myth, in African and Andean lore, there are always gates, downward gates, as if humankind once knew the way and has simply forgotten how to find it again. If Earth has endured ages of cataclysm, ice, fire, impact, flood, then perhaps the safest refuge was never the mountain peak, but the hollow beneath it. Underground, temperature holds steady, air can be managed, light can be mirrored through crystal or polished stone, and food can be grown within closed systems. Today we dream of underground cities as the future. But what if they are not the future at all, but a faint echo of the first retreat? Maybe the civilization we seek did not perish, it withdrew. Like soldiers descending into bunkers as the final storm approaches, or like the wise choosing sleep, waiting for the world above to grow quiet enough to remember them. And perhaps, just perhaps, they never truly left. Strange caverns in the Amazon still remain unmapped. Cracks in Tibet plunge hundreds of meters into darkness. Fountains appear from nowhere, roar, then vanish. Seismic instruments record low, harmonic hums with no discernible source. Are these merely quirks of geology, or are they, faintly, stubbornly, the heartbeat of something still alive below? Here is where myth meets measurement, where imagination crosses into memory, where the tales of those beneath may no longer be superstition, but an unopened door beneath our feet. And if you feel a chill, a strange stirring under your skin as you imagine that dark silence, do not be afraid. Because every shiver born from mystery is the body remembering something the mind has forgotten. A tremor, not of fear, but of recognition. A resonance deep in the bone, calling softly from below. If a civilization once walked the earth before us, surely they must have spoken, shared thought, passed memory, carved meaning into the fabric of their world. Every culture we know has done so, but what if they lived so far back in time that even the concept of language as we understand it did not yet exist? What if their way of speaking was not heard or read, but felt? Perhaps what they left behind was not ink or clay, but frequency, rhythm, and resonance. Not words for the ear, nor symbols for the eye, but messages for consciousness itself. We know languages can vanish, Rongorongo on Easter Island, Proto-Elamite in ancient Iran, the woven codes of the Amazon, the knotted chords of the Inca, quipu, strands that speak without letters. And if even these few thousand-year-old systems have become indecipherable, how would we recognize a form of communication from tens of thousands of years ago, especially if it still surrounds us disguised as pattern, vibration, or light? Imagine a people who spoke through geometry, who shaped stone and sound into resonance chambers, who stored information not by marking it, but by embedding it into the vibration of matter itself. Just as modern modulation hides data in radio waves, they might have encoded knowledge in harmonics, in the living pulse of stone, water, crystal, and air. Cymatics shows us that when sound meets matter, it arranges it into perfect order, circles, spirals, lattices, patterns that mirror the architecture of life itself. If sound can sculpt sand, then why not memory? What if the spiral carvings, the mandalas, The sacred flower patterns found in temples across the world are not decorations but the fossilized shapes of ancient voices, frozen songs from a time when sound and meaning were the same. Across Egypt, Sumer, India, and the Andes, there are chambers that hum when you speak, rooms tuned to specific frequencies. Step inside and your voice merges with the walls until you can't tell where you end and the stone begins. That is an architecture. It's communication. A conversation between human residents and the earth's own tone. Or maybe they didn't write on the stones, they wrote into them, encoded intention into vibration. When we walk through such places today and feel chills, not of fear but of recognition, perhaps something inside us is answering back, a part of our biology still fluent in a forgotten dialect of rhythm. It may be that the first civilization didn't use alphabets or pictographs. They spoke through fields, forms, and frequencies. Their language was not translated, it was experienced. You didn't need to read it, you only needed to feel the shift of energy, the harmony of tone, the subtle heartbeat of the earth echoing your own. And if that's true, then much of what we now call abstract art, sacred geometry, or the music of the spheres may not be imagination at all. It may be the residue of remembrance, a language that never died, only grew too quiet for the modern world to hear. Across the face of the earth, in the painted caves of Altamira, the carved stones of Göbekli Tepe, the bas-reliefs of Angkor, the temples of Egypt, the deserts of Peru, and the rock sanctuaries of India, the same images appear again and again. Spirals, circles, winged beings, trees of life, twin serpents coiled around a single staff, half-human creatures, the all-seeing eye, concentric rings like blueprints of the cosmos, different ages, different peoples, the same language, drawn not in words but in form. We call it coincidence, but perhaps it is not coincidence at all. Perhaps it is memory repeating itself in symbols. Human memory does not always speak in sentences. Sometimes it remembers in shapes. Think of DNA, invisible codes passed down through millennia, repeating their sequence so that life may continue. What if the mind works in a similar way? What if, buried deep within human consciousness, there exists a symbolic genome, a library of archetypal images inherited from a time before speech, before nations, before the written word? The Maya carved symbols that mirror the falcon god Horus of Egypt. Australian Aborigines speak of the dreaming, their sacred origin stories, filled with spirals identical to those carved into the stones of ancient Scotland. The Dogon of Africa depicted the invisible star Sirius B long before telescopes existed. And everywhere, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, we find the winged being, not the angel of later religions, but a timeless figure standing between heaven and earth, as if representing the bridge itself. Could it be that the first civilization left behind not monuments of stone, but a dictionary of symbols, a visual code that no disaster could erase because it was written into the human psyche itself? Carl Jung called them archetypes, eternal patterns that live in every soul. But perhaps they are more than psychological echoes. Perhaps they are the spiritual inheritance of an age so ancient that even its name has turned to dust. Each time a child, unprompted, doodles a spiral. Each time a dream presents a winged figure or an all-seeing eye. Each time an artist sculpts a creature half human, half animal, something stirs. A whisper through the generations. You have seen this before. These are not random motifs, they are fragments of a shared vision remnants of a moment when humanity first awoke, when we looked up at the sky and saw ourselves reflected in it. Perhaps the symbols we call sacred are not our attempts to describe gods, but the first civilization's way of describing us, their descendants, their continuation, their living proof. And maybe, just maybe, these recurring symbols are the last key they left behind, a universal cipher meant for those who still remember, those who can still listen. A door that opens not with logic, but with recognition. So when a child draws a spiral no one taught them, when you dream of eyes that watch from the dark, when your hand sketches wings you've never seen, perhaps it isn't imagination at all. Perhaps it is the oldest voice in the world softly saying through you, "We are still here. We never disappeared."
Imagine this. You're standing in the dust of prehistory, a layer of earth carbon dated to the Stone Age. Around you lie fragments of bone, flint tools, primitive pottery. Everything fits neatly into the timeline we've been taught. And then your spade hits metal. Not a crude ornament, but a crafted object, perfectly cast, engraved with microscopic precision. A piece that shouldn't exist. Time, it seems, has skipped a beat. Archaeologists call such anomalies OOP arts, out-of-place artifacts, objects that do not belong. And while the orthodox response is usually silence or skepticism, their growing number makes that silence harder to sustain. The most famous of them, perhaps, is the Baghdad battery. Clay jar, an iron rod, a copper sheath, traces of acid inside. In modern terms, a simple galvanic cell, a battery. Yet its age is more than 2,000 years, centuries before any record of electricity in human history. Then there is the Antikythera mechanism, raised from the Aegean seafloor, a corroded bronze mass that, when X-rayed, revealed interlocking gears, a differential system, and the ability to predict planetary motion. A machine so advanced that its equal would not appear again for over a millennium. Elsewhere, quartz crystals in Mesoamerica cut with laser-like symmetry, metal spheres from South Africa embedded in rock layers billions of years old, and sketches in the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, helicopters, tanks and gear systems, so far ahead of his time that one wonders, did he invent or did he remember? If these fragments are genuine, then perhaps history is not a line of ascent, but a loop. A recurring rhythm in which knowledge blooms, collapses, and is rediscovered under new names. The real mystery may not be why they had technology, but why we assume they couldn't. We call our ancestors primitive because we measure them with our tools, not with theirs. We forget that a civilization can advance without engines or circuits. That mastery of resonance, magnetism, or biophysics could be as real a technology as silicon and steel. Maybe their science grew in harmony with nature, not in opposition to it, using materials that decay too quickly to survive the ages, leaving only the stone and the silence. Each OOPART, then, is not a contradiction. It is a message in a bottle tossed across epochs, a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not merely soil, it is an archive where the earth itself guards the memory of what came before. And somewhere behind the question, behind the glint of that impossible artifact, waits the deeper silence that asks, who were they? How far did they go? And why did they choose or were forced to disappear?
There's something deeply strange about humanity's oldest stories. No matter how far you travel, across oceans, across languages, across civilizations that never met, the same memory appears again and again, a great flood, the world submerged, life nearly erased, and a few who survived, to begin again, from Noah in the Bible to Utnapishtim in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, from the Hopi people of the Americas to Manu in ancient India. Without knowing one another, all told the same tale of water rising, of a sky darkened, of an age ending. It's easy to call it myth. But what if myth is simply memory that has survived too long to be called history? Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth trembled through a mystery scientists now call the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plunged, then soared again in a blink of geologic time. Glaciers melted, oceans climbed over 120 meters, drowning coastlines, erasing valleys and silencing plains where early humans might once have thrived. The cradles of that forgotten world now lie beneath the waves, unreachable, unrecorded, unseen. Look closely at the map of the continental shelves. Sunderland, once a vast, fertile subcontinent of Southeast Asia, now scattered into islands. Doggerland, which once joined Britain to Europe, gone beneath the North Sea. Beringia, the bridge between Siberia and Alaska, swallowed by the Pacific. Each could have been a cradle. Each vanished without farewell. And then a clue, faint but persistent. Microscopic glass spherules, charred layers of soil across continents, black mats rich in carbon, signs perhaps of a cosmic impact, a comet, an asteroid, the spark that plunged the planet into chaos and fire. If true, the flood was not just a storm, it was a reset, a planetary silence that forced the story of civilization to begin anew. So what survived that night of unmaking? Not libraries, not monuments, only stories, the oral fossils of memory. Tales whispered by firelight passed from trembling voice to trembling voice until the truth dissolved into allegory. And yet today, the two rivers of knowledge, myth and science, are slowly converging. Geology and legend no longer stand apart, they mirror each other like sky and sea. For every submerged ruin we find, every ancient delta mapped beneath the waves, another fragment of the flood narrative takes on new weight. Perhaps the Great Flood did happen, perhaps it ended not just an age, but an entire cycle of civilization. If so, the real question is no longer, was it real, but rather, what did we forget when the waters fell silent? If there truly was a civilization before us, and if it vanished in a cataclysm, as we have already wondered, then what exactly was lost? And more haunting still, what might have survived? Not every chapter of history is written in stone. Not every triumph endures through monuments or broken walls. Some legacies live in silence, carried not by matter, but by memory, woven into language, music, mathematics, symbols, and sacred ritual. These are the veins through which an older knowledge still flows, invisible yet alive, preserved in the imagination, in ceremony, in whispered stories around the fire. They did not need bricks to endure, they needed only the human mind. Across cultures, Greek, Hindu, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, we find echoes of a golden age, a first time. The Greeks called it the age of the gods, the Hindus Satya Yuga, the age of truth and harmony, the Egyptians Zep-Tepi, the first epoch when the gods still walked among men. In the West, it is remembered as Eden, a pure garden before the fall, and every one of these epochs ends the same way, with imbalance. Not merely natural disaster, but a spiritual fracture. When pride outgrew wisdom and harmony broke from within. If there was once a real story buried beneath these myths, perhaps the first civilization never truly vanished. Perhaps it continues, not in its cities or machines, but in its symbols. Maybe we have inherited more than we remember, and simply forgotten the name of the giver. Look, for example, at the spiral, carved since the Stone Age into cave walls, jewelry, and temples. It reappears in art, architecture, sacred geometry, and in the idea of eternal return. The world tree, too, the axis between heaven, earth, and the underworld, grows across every culture. Yggdrasil in Norse myth, the saber of the Maya, the Ashvatha tree in the Hindu Upanishads. Coincidence? Or the residue of a shared memory reshaped by countless tongues? Even mathematics hums with the same echo. Why do we still divide the circle and the day by 12 and 60? The sexagesimal system of the Sumerians, 6,000 years old, still governs our clocks and compasses. Is that mere efficiency or the survival of an ancient logic? A pattern of thought inherited rather than invented? And in the alignment of temples and stones, Stonehenge, Angkor Wat, Giza, the sky is their blueprint, each built in harmony with the sun, the moon, and the stars. No one can explain how these cultures, separated by oceans and ages, achieved such astronomical precision, unless perhaps they were not discovering but remembering. If a vast intelligence once existed, a system of symbol, rhythm, and cosmic order, then the question is not did it exist, but who still keeps it? Perhaps its fragments lie hidden in the mystery traditions, in Egyptian theology, in the Vedas, in Hermetic writings, in the Tao. Beneath layers of ritual and metaphor, they may conceal an unbroken chain of understanding, codes left for those able to see beyond words. The Book of the Dead, the Rig Veda, the Corpus Hermeticum, even the Book of Revelation. These may not be mere scripture, but encrypted memories, keys to an older wisdom. And if that ancient intelligence still lives, we may not find it in ruins or museums. We may find it within ourselves, in intuition, in dreams, in the quiet act of creation, in that wordless knowing that stirs the soul when the mind falls silent. Because perhaps the oldest library in the world is not made of stone, but of consciousness.
Pause for a moment. Look around you, the glowing cities, the satellites tracing silent arcs through orbit, the algorithms writing poetry, the instant web of voices linking billions. It feels like the summit of progress, doesn't it? A triumph of reason and invention where history is imagined as a single rising line. From flint to fiber optics, from firelight to the digital dawn. But if you look closer, really look, does something feel strangely familiar? If a first civilization once existed, and if it fell, where did its path end before the silence began? Perhaps they too reached a kind of pinnacle, not of industry, but of understanding. They may not have built rockets, but they understood the rhythm of the earth. They may not have tamed electrons, but they knew how to live in balance with the sky, the soil, and the unseen. And then something shifted, a tremor in that balance, a single thread of arrogance pulled too far. A storm, a flood, a forgetting. The tide rose, the stories sank, and only myths survived, faint memories of the time before time. Now we stand in another age and a world of glass and circuitry. And yet perhaps we are tracing the same spiral once more. We have reshaped the climate. We bend ecosystems to our will. We chase speed, growth, expansion, but rarely stop to ask, toward what end? History may not be a straight line after all. It might be a spiral, vast and patient, where each ascent mirrors an ancient fall. And if we fail to listen, that spiral will not be progress. It will be repetition. What caused their downfall? No one knows. But if they once forgot that they were part of nature, not its master, then their silence may be the warning we were meant to hear. So let us ask, does advancement always come with imbalance? Can intellect survive without wisdom? Are we truly different from those who came before? Or are we simply the next verse of the same unfinished song? Perhaps humanity's task is not to outrun collapse, but to pause, to listen, to the echo that rises from the depths of time, the soft voice of a civilization that once dreamed and perished so that we might remember.
If you've come with us this far, it means that somewhere within you there is also a question. Maybe you're not seeking an answer at all. Maybe you're just searching for that quiet recognition, a soundless echo in the heart, a fragment of memory you've never lived, and yet somehow you remember. We've wandered through buried cities and vanished coasts, through myths that repeat across continents, through symbols and numbers, through music, dreams, and silence. We've wondered whether there was a civilization before Sumer, before Egypt, before everything our textbooks call the beginning. But now, as the last light of this journey fades, let's put the evidence aside, let the mind rest. Because if there is truth in any of this, its proof is not in the stones, it's in the feeling that lingers behind your ribs. Imagine it. A civilization, unnamed, unknown, that once lived, that once looked up at the same sky and wondered as we do. They feared, they loved, they listened to the wind over the sea and asked what lay beyond the horizon. And then they were gone. Not erased, just quieted, like the last note of a song still trembling in the air long after the instrument stops. They left no books, no maps, only a question. And perhaps that is the greatest gift any civilization can leave behind, a question that refuses to die, because once you've asked it, you are awake. You can never truly go back to sleep, and suddenly history is no longer a line, it's a tapestry, woven of memory and forgetting, of collapse and rebirth. If the first civilization ever existed, maybe it never truly disappeared. Maybe it became us, woven into our curiosity, our longing for the stars, our hunger to know what we've forgotten. And now as you sit here in the stillness, a soft light around you, a faint melody drifting through the air. Perhaps you are not merely listening to a story. Perhaps you are hearing an echo from 10,000 years ago, from someone, somewhere, who once looked up at the same stars and whispered the same questions. Where did we come from? Who are we in the great sweep of the cosmos? And is someone, long ago, still asking them, through us? Thank you for walking with us through a journey that offers no ending, only doorways quietly opening into the unknown. If your heart feels a little calmer now, if you find yourself wanting to keep listening to the voices that drift through time, then leave a like, a comment, or a simple subscription, so that this small corner, amidst the endless sea of data, can remain a place where history still whispers beneath the stars. And perhaps on some distant night ahead, we'll meet again, on another journey, through another civilization, through another dream of humankind, Lunora, where history sleeps softly beneath the stars.